Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video, we will cover how to create a mesocycle of training for the goal of muscle hypertrophy. First and foremost, we need to cover some basic volume landmarks for hypertrophy training. This concept of volume landmarks can be credited to Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization, and you can learn more about this concept from the book How Much Should I Train, which can be found on the Renaissance Periodization website. Essentially, we have 4 volume landmarks that are relevant to hypertrophy training. These are maintenance volume, minimum effective volume, maximum adaptive volume, and maximum recoverable volume. Maintenance volume refers to the amount of volume required to maintain your current muscle mass for each muscle group. Minimum effective volume refers to the minimum amount of volume required to see muscle growth. Maximum adaptive volume refers to the amount of volume which provides the best hypertrophic response, and maximum recoverable volume refers to the maximum amount of volume that the trainee can recover from and see hypertrophy gains. Now that we understand the volume landmarks, we now need to establish the general mesocycle structure for this training program. Essentially, we need to determine the overload to deload ratio, or in other words, how many weeks of overloading training will be performed before a deload. Overloading training refers to a week where volume is somewhere between minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume. So basically, an overloading week of training can be defined as enough volume to see progress. A deload week, on the other hand, refers to training at somewhere between maintenance volume and minimum effective volume. This means that during a deload, we aren't trying to actually progress at all. The goal is to simply maintain hypertrophy gains and decay systemic fatigue. For this example program, we will use 4 weeks of overloading training for every 1 week deload. So the structure will look like this. The first week of the mesocycle will be a deload, and the following 4 weeks will involve overloading training. Now we can start to get into the details of how the different training variables can be programmed. The first and most important consideration for a hypertrophy program is to establish how much volume will be performed for each muscle group. For hypertrophy training, volume can be defined as the number of sets performed per muscle group per week. As already established, the amount of volume for each muscle group should be between maintenance and minimum effective volume for the deload week to allow mental and physical recovery from the previous mesocycle. And for the following 4 weeks, volume should be between minimum effective and maximum recoverable volume to allow a stimulus for muscle growth. For this particular trainee, let's say they have established these rough volume landmarks for each primary muscle group. Using these general volume guides, let's now roughly plan what volumes will be used during our training program. For the deload week, the volume will be somewhere between maintenance and minimum effective volume, and for the overloading training weeks, the volume will be somewhere between minimum effective and maximum recoverable volume. We will prescribe exact volumes for each muscle group later in this video when we apply the progression methods for the mesocycle. The next variable to consider is training frequency. This refers to how many times per week the trainee will work out, and also how many times per week each muscle group will be trained. Frequency is primarily a way of distributing volume over the week, so the exact number of times a muscle group is trained per week is not significantly important, provided that volume is equated. Let's say for this trainee, they will perform 6 workouts per week using a push-pull leg split. This means that the chest, shoulders, and triceps will be trained on Monday and Thursday, the back and biceps will be trained on Tuesday and Friday, and the legs will be trained on Wednesday and Saturday. Now that we know what rough volume ranges will be used and what the weekly training split will be, we can now implement exercises for each muscle group. Starting with Mondays and Thursdays push sessions, we will implement the following exercises. For these sessions, we will use the dumbbell bench press, seated military press, cable chest flies, and cable tricep pushdowns. The order of the exercises has been changed on each day to emphasize the chest on Monday and the shoulders and triceps on Thursday. For Tuesday and Friday's pull sessions, we will implement the following exercises. For these sessions, we will use the bent over barbell row, cable pull down, and dumbbell bicep curl to hit the back and biceps. The order of the exercises has been changed on each day again to emphasize vertical pulling on Tuesday and horizontal pulling on Friday. And for Wednesday and Saturday's leg sessions, we will implement the following exercises. Since compound lifts for the lower body can be very taxing, the exercises will change on each day. For Wednesday's session, the quads can be emphasized by performing back squats, hamstring curls, leg extensions and calf raises, and on Saturday's session, the hamstrings can be emphasized by performing stiff leg deadlifts, leg extensions, leg curls and calf raises. This way, squats and stiff leg deadlifts aren't performed in the same session, as this may be too taxing on the trainee. Next, we need to establish the loading and rep ranges that will be used for each exercise. Load and reps performed have an inverse relationship, meaning that the more load that is used, the lower the rep range will be. For hypertrophy training, we generally want most of our training to fall somewhere in the 6 to 20 rep range. The exact reps performed in this range don't really matter as long as the sets are taken fairly close to failure. However, some exercises are better suited to lower rep ranges, while some exercises are better suited to using higher rep ranges. Generally, exercises that are better suited to low rep ranges are compound lifts that require high stability, while isolation exercises with low stability demands are usually better suited to higher rep ranges. Now that we have covered the fundamental variables, we need to cover how training can be progressed over the mesocycle. There are 3 basic methods of progression that we will cover in this video. The first method of progression is to maintain all variables. We don't always have to actually plan progressive overload in a program. Progressive overload can occur naturally as an adaptation to training. So for this progression method, the deload uses a lower volume, somewhere between maintenance and minimum effective volume, while the following weeks all use a higher volume, somewhere between minimum effective and maximum recoverable volume. With this progression method, the load should remain the same each week, and a fairly close proximity to failure should be prescribed. By maintaining these variables, the trainee should be able to perform more reps on average over the course of the mesocycle. For example, let's say a load of 90 kilos was used for a bench press for 2 sets during a deload and 4 sets for the following overloading weeks, and the reps in reserve were prescribed at 1 to 2. The trainee would then take each set of 90 kilos to an RIR of 1 to 2 and record how many reps were performed. Over the course of the mesocycle, the reps would likely increase over time as the trainee is slowly becoming bigger and stronger. For example, the reps performed may look something like this. As we can see here, around 1 to 3 more reps are able to be performed each week over the course of the 4 total sets. Depending on how advanced the trainee is, progress may be made at a faster or slower rate. The next method of progression is to increase reps in reserve over the course of the mesocycle. For this progression method, we want to use a lower volume for the deload and a higher volume for the overloading weeks, as we already established in the previous method. The load should also remain the same each week, while the progression method comes from decreasing reps in reserve over the mesocycle. By decreasing the reps in reserve each week, the trainee should naturally be able to perform more reps in each set, as they are taking each set closer to failure. For example, let's use the same example of a trainee performing the bench press with 90 kilos for 2 sets in the deload week and 4 sets in the overloading weeks. In this example, we can prescribe an RIR of 4 for the deload week and the first overloading week, then the reps in reserve decrease by 1 each week, down to an RIR of 1 in the final week of the mesocycle. The reps performed should increase each week as a result of increasing the proximity to failure. For example, this trainee may perform the following reps each week. As we can see here, the reps increase over the mesocycle since they are training closer to failure. And the last progression method is to increase volume over the course of the mesocycle. For this progression method, we want to use somewhere between maintenance and minimum effective volume for the deload week. Then over the next 4 overloading weeks, we want to increase the number of sets performed per muscle group each week, while the load remains the same. These volumes should start somewhere closer to minimum effective volume in the first week and end somewhere closer to maximum recoverable volume in the final week of the mesocycle. For example, let's use the chest muscle group as an example. The deload week starts with a volume of 10 sets, the second week then increases to 14 sets to provide an overloading stimulus, then the next 3 weeks increase in volume by 2 sets per week, up to a maximum of 20 sets. And now we can finally create the complete mesocycle of hypertrophy training. As we can see here, we have our 6-day training week with the push-pull legs workout in place. We can also input the exercises that we previously selected for each session. Next, we can prescribe the loads to be used for each exercise on each day. The loads used will correspond to the rep range that the trainee wants to perform their sets in. The load used will be highly individualized based on the trainee's strength levels, so here is a general example. We can see here that the loads undulate between sessions based on which muscle groups we want to emphasize. For example, the dumbbell bench press uses a heavier load on Monday as it is performed first, while the load used is slightly lower on Thursday to work in a higher rep range. And finally, we can input our volumes and reps in reserve prescriptions based on what methods of progression we want to use. For this example, let's use a basic maintenance of all volumes and allow the trainee to gradually progress by themselves. As we can see here, we have still prescribed a rough reps in reserve goal for each exercise to ensure that they are taking each set close enough to failure. The RIR range is slightly lower on compound lifts and slightly higher on isolation lifts. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.